During your CELTA course, you're going to come across a lot of terminology and a lot of acronyms that you will be expected to know and cram in during your intensive 1 month or 2 month part-time CELTA course. These are terms and acronyms that you will hear throughout the duration of your course, and by the end of your course you are expected to have a deep understanding as well as knowing how to apply these concepts in your teaching practice. Authentic material. So authentic material is the use of real-life text or materials created for native speakers of the language, such as newspapers, magazines, or even videos. You will use authentic materials to create a bespoke lesson for said student, and a lesson that really progresses through the article, video, or whatever you choose to use. And by the end of it, the student should have a good idea and a good working knowledge of the vocabulary being used in the article, as well as some of the grammar. It depends on the needs of your students. I find that a lot of mature students who are at a certain point in their career like to work with more authentic material, more real-life examples rather than the textbooks. So this is something that you will develop during your course, and it's certainly something that I am doing more of this. I find, especially with my students, with my mature students, on a one-to-one basis, especially the use of video. I use everything from corporate videos if I'm working with students who are learning English for business. I use media videos, news stories, and select certain news items depending on the subject topic that interests the student. During my time teaching students, I've found that students really enjoy authentic material because it's something that is based on real life. They're real life examples. Sometimes the textbooks can become very rote and frankly quite boring, and students are trying to look for something that they can identify with and that they can feel a sense of accomplishment when they watch the television or listen to the radio or read a news article and then spot something that they've learnt with you. And it's a really rewarding experience, and it's something that I personally enjoy doing. I enjoy taking real life examples and then adapting those materials for the needs of my student. Boardwork. Boardwork is the use of the whiteboard or chalkboard by the teacher to present information, demonstrate language points, or engage students in activities. Now, this is something where you will need to develop some tech abilities, because certain centres now do have a lot of technology, a lot of interactive technology that you can employ and are encouraged to employ in order to keep the students engaged. Obviously, there will be times when you will not have access to a laptop or a monitor, and I've been in some situations where I've spent hours and hours preparing a PowerPoint presentation and then gone into the classroom and found that nothing works in terms of technology, which can be quite daunting at start. But developing Boardwork also means the presentation of the information you're putting on the board. So for example, during the CELTA course, you will be told that too much text, it can be overwhelming for the student, so it's far better to work with a little bit of text on the board and not overwhelm the students with too much information. So the use of the board needs to be strategic by the teacher, and the presentation needs to be clear and crisp, and the information you are relaying needs to be in sync with your presentation of the information you're giving. Concept checking questions, or CCQs. Concept checking questions are designed to ensure that learners have understood a new language concept or structure correctly by checking their understanding of its meaning and usage. I would say that this is one of the best things I learnt during my CELTA course. CCQs are amazing because it aims to address the idea of a closed question. So for example, once you've explained a grammatical point, you might ask the students, did you understand that? And in response, you're probably going to get a resounding yes or heads nodding. But are you sure they've really understood that? Okay, so what you would do with the whole idea of concept checking questions is ask questions to check if they've understood the concept behind that grammatical point. So let's say, for example, you're discussing a certain language point such as the present continuous tense. And let's say on the board you have an image of a person cooking dinner. So we have, she is cooking dinner. The teacher would ask the students, is she cooking dinner now or was she cooking dinner earlier? And the students hopefully will say, she's cooking dinner now. The teacher could then follow up with, yes, she's cooking dinner now. Is she finished cooking dinner already? Hopefully the students will say no. And here you're trying to differentiate between an action that is taking place now, the tense of something taking place now, with that of an action that's already happened. So once the students have distinguished between the action of the past and the action in the present, you could follow up with something like, right, she's still cooking dinner. So is it something happening now or in the past? And hopefully the students will say now. And then you would say, exactly. Now, these are just follow-up checking questions to ensure that your students understand what you're teaching them. And I can't emphasize how life-changing CCQs are as a teaching tool that a teacher employs in the class, because just imagine if you have a quiet student who hasn't really understood the concept but just is nodding their head, and you get this all the time. You know, you've got to put yourselves in the learner's shoes. You're coming over from another country, or you know, if you're not coming over from another country, maybe you're in their country, but they're learning a new language. And they don't want to let the teachers down, and younger students tend to just nod their heads, whereas mature students might pipe up, at least the more vocal ones, and tell you that they don't understand. But it's such a great way to avoid singling a student out, right? You see that student in the corner who doesn't quite understand it, but what you do is through the concept checking questions, you get the whole class involved, and together this understanding of the concept will become more clearer. So it's such a brilliant tool, and really it does take a lot of practice. Also, in your lesson plans during your CELTA course, you will be required to put down the CCQs that you will be using for a certain lesson, so that the assessor can see that you really have a thorough understanding of CCQs. But I think CCQs are just a wonderful practice in the classroom to just have in your teaching repertoire. Choral repetition. Now this is just a technique where students repeat words or phrases simultaneously as a group, and it's used for pronunciation practice or language reinforcement. You will see sometimes that you'll have a class which has problems with pronunciation. Certain cultures have problems with certain words. For example, Arabic speakers, they do not have the letter P in their language. So often they pronounce words that begin with a P with their B. So Pakistan might become Pakistan. Pat might become Bat. So it's just trying again not to single one individual out, but trying to get the whole class to do this repetition. Now, some students may find this a little patronizing if they're quite, if they're older, but I do tend to employ this if I see that most of the students in the class are struggling with pronunciation. So, for example, one thing I tended to do quite a lot of with my Brazilian students was to break up words into syllables and identify the emphasis of the word and then just go through them. And it did wonders for them, because I would tend to get my students to give a presentation. I still do this. I get my students to do a presentation about a topic we've been discussing that week, and then I get a chance to drill these words into their head, and then they get a chance to speak it, and you can really see the difference in their pronunciation and a massive improvement. So don't be shy about employing this technique as a new teacher, because I was very nervous about how my students might react to a practice like this, but you employ it when you feel that this needs to be done. And remember, your job is to teach, and it's your job therefore to be confident in the guidance you're going to give your students. MFP stands for meaning, form, pronunciation. Another wonderful CELTA technique, and it's to do with teaching sequence used to introduce new vocabulary or grammar, focusing first on meaning, then form, and finally pronunciation. So let's just take a quick example of this. Let's say you introduce the verb to play. Now, you would ask the students, what does play mean? And hopefully the students, depending on their level, will say, oh, it means a fun or to participate in a game or activity. So you would affirm that. You would say, okay, that's correct. When we play, we have fun or participate in activities like games or sports. Then once you know that they understand the meaning, you will move on to the form of the verb. So you would say something like, how do we form the base form of the verb to play? Or you would say the infinitive. The students would say, just to play, hopefully. Then the teacher would say, okay, so the base form is play. What about the past tense? The students would say, played, hopefully, if they know it, or they will have a try. And then you would say, okay, that's correct, the past tense is played. Now how about the present participle? And they would say the student is playing. You would say, perfect, the present participle is playing. So depending, you would really focus on, if you're giving a lesson on the past tense, then you would just stick to the form of the past tense, of course. But I'm just giving you this example. Then you would move on to the pronunciation. You might say, let's practice the pronunciation of play. Repeat after me, play. Students will say play. Obviously, play is not too much of a difficult word. But for example, if you have Arabs who are saying blay instead of play, then you would try to get the P out of them. And, you would try to break up the word if they are struggling with, pay attention to the A sound in the middle. And then you would, for example, get them to say it a little faster. And, so that's the way you break up the language into smaller chunks so that the students really get a rounded sense of the whole, the word that you are teaching them. Controlled practice. The definition of controlled practice in CELTA terminology is activities or exercises where learners practice language in a highly controlled context, often with limited language variations. So for example, let's say we're doing a lesson on the past simple, you would give the students a task to do. For example, a worksheet containing sentences in the present tense, and then you would instruct the students to rewrite each sentence in the past simple tense. So they would, for example, have to fill in the gaps with the correct form of the verb. You would walk around and monitor and assist students as they work on the activity. You're trying to get a feel and a gist of what they already understand or know or do not know. And then you would review the answers as a class and provide feedback. So that's an example of controlled practice. You're basically controlling the conditions in which they're engaging with that specific language point or area. Drilling is similar to choral repetition, but it's the repeated oral practice of language items such as vocabulary or sentence structures to improve fluency and accuracy. So choral repetition might just be one word, but in drilling you might have a full sentence that you're trying to teach the students. So for example, imagine you're trying to teach the schwa, for example, then you would try to get that sound out of the students and build their fluency. So again, they would do this as a class together, and you need to understand that, you know, things like choral repetition and drilling might be something that we as people who study in, you know, from the UK and stuff, I mean, people don't learn too many languages in the UK, to be honest, but, you know, concepts like drilling and choral repetition might be something students are used to, you know, in their culture. So they might not find it as alien as we do. I often find that, I mean, I did as well, teachers often find that this whole thing quite alien to them when they're teaching it. And I think it's to do with this kind of patronizing aspect of using tools such as drilling and choral repetition. But trust me, when you're in the classroom setting, the students will begin to appreciate what you're trying to do. And obviously you're only doing it because you've identified a weak spot. You're not doing it for the sake of doing it. Although when you're doing your CELTA course, when you're doing your teaching practice, you will do it for the sake of doing it, to show the assessor, the examiner, that you're capable of employing these tools and concepts. The next one is eliciting. So eliciting is a teaching technique where the teacher encourages students to produce language or answers through prompting or questioning. So eliciting is not giving the students the answers straight away. It's a way of checking what the students already know, and it's a way of making the students really work to acquire the language. So for example, let's say I had the verb to grab, right? So I might have at the start of my lesson an image of a hand grabbing something. And then I would ask the students, I wouldn't say, okay, this is grabbing the pencil. I would say, what's happening here? And then they might say they're holding the pencil. And then I would say, holding, is there another word? I mean, and then they would say, okay, it's catching. And then eventually, if they don't arrive at the word grabbing, you will at least have eliminated all the words they do know, which is not the word you are looking for. And you would be able to go through the nuances of that act of grabbing, right? You could say, well, no, catching is when you do this. Holding is when you do this. And then you would eventually arrive at grabbing. And, you know, to take a more simple example, right, if you're working with primary school children, you could say, you know, today we're going to learn some names of animals. Can anyone tell me the name of an animal that has a long trunk and big ears? And then you would see if the student knows, elephant. Or you would say an animal that says meow and likes to chase mice, and they would say cat, hopefully, and so on and so on. But basically you're trying to get them to start using their brains and trying to warm their brain up to the lesson. Gist task. Now, the definition of a gist task is an activity where learners read or listen to a text to get the main idea or general understanding rather than focusing on specific details. So basically, you would get your students to listen to or read an article, and you would give them a very, very short time to read or listen to an audio. And you could do one of two things. You could get them to quickly summarize what they have just listened to in pairs, so they could bounce off each other. And then you wouldn't spend too much time on details or unfamiliar vocabulary. You're just trying to get the students' understanding of the text as a whole. Okay? Now, the reason why you're doing this is because it's easier for students to try and have an aim to work towards. So understanding the whole article, let's say if the article is about the fashion industry, they could tell you that this article is about the fashion industry rather than getting bogged down on specific terminology, which you will unpack during the duration of the lesson. So this does two things, right? It reduces your talking time, which is something we're going to come on to in a bit, and it increases the students' talking time, and you get a chance to listen to each student and assess their level of understanding of the text. You get to assess the way they are explaining what they've just read or listened to, and it's a great way to boost their confidence at the start of the lesson as well. They're like, okay, well, I've just read an entire piece of text. I don't know what each individual word might mean, but I get the general gist of the text. And as a language learner, for example, I learn Arabic, and I do this quite often. I do this every day. I read an article in Arabic and I have a sense of what the article is saying, and then I go to unpack individual words or expressions that are unfamiliar to me. But I do feel a sense of accomplishment when I can look at an article and quickly scan it and know that I have a general idea or gist of what this article is about. So remember, you're not spending too much time on the gist task. Functional language. Functional language is used for specific purposes such as making requests, giving directions, or expressing opinions, often taught in context to fulfill particular communication needs. So, for example, when I teach English for business, there's a lot of specific vocabulary that students need to learn. For example, the language that people use in a meeting, for example. The language that people might use in the media. The language that people might use when they are meeting someone for the first time. So it varies depending on the needs of your students. Lead in. So the definition of a lead in is an introductory activity or discussion used to engage learners and prepare them for the main lesson topic or language focus. Now, when I started my CELTA course, I would always get confused between the gist task and the lead in. Now, the purpose of the lead in is an introductory activity or discussion designed to engage students, right? And you're trying to activate their prior knowledge and prepare them for the main lesson topic or the language in focus. The gist task is a reading or listening activity that aims to quickly familiarize students with the main or general understanding of a text or audio recording. So, for example, let me take my example of fashion again. So I remember during my CELTA training, and it was a lesson that I was really proud of, I began by showing a couple of random images of models from some fashion show. I think it was in London or Paris, I can't remember. And I was just asking them, what do you think these people are doing? Where are they? What's the purpose of this whole event? And then it would just kind of draw the students in. People who are into fashion, for example, people who know designer wear way better than I did, and are just up to speed with the latest fashion trends. They were describing the clothes people were wearing. And again, the lead-in is very short and very quick, and it's just to kind of wake the students up and to kind of slowly warm them up to the general topic of discussion for that lesson, before you get into the nitty-gritty of, the grammar and certain words. And the analogy I always give is, each lesson is like walking into a banquet. So you first walk into a banquet and you survey the banquet and you realize that you're at a banquet. And then you go to maybe taste some of the food, which is the gist task. And then you maybe sit down for the main meal, which is, the actual lesson where you can engage and discuss and have conversations with people. So think of the lead-in as walking into a room for the first time and describing what you're seeing, or describing the sense of what you're seeing. Lexis. The definition of Lexis in CELTA is not just a dictionary, but it's all the vocabulary or words used in a language, including single words, idiomatic expressions and phrases that you will be teaching during that lesson. Teacher talk time, or TTT. This is something that you will hear again and again in CELTA. Now, the main thing about the CELTA course, and I think one of its most important lessons, is that you as a teacher need to reduce your talking time. And your goal and your aim is to increase the students' talking time, or STT. So the amount of time students spend actively participating in speaking activities or discussions during a lesson. It's your duty as a teacher to facilitate in that 1, 2, 3 hours that you have with the students the maximum, the optimal student talk time. And really, it's a hard balance to achieve when you first start teaching. You realize that, my God, especially when you're teaching elementary students who are quite shy, you will get sick and tired of the sound of your own voice. But this is where your creativity as a teacher needs to come in. This is where you need to have lots of different tasks at hand, because you will have times when you introduce a task, and maybe in your mind you have this whole vision of this task is going to be so amazing for my students and they're going to love it, and you get to class and you introduce this task and it just falls flat. So you need to have an arsenal of different activities and different approaches, and you will find that different cultures, different students, of course, even have different approaches to learning. So you will learn to become adaptable as you gain more experience, and you will be able to switch from one task to the other. I mean, I've had lessons where during the break I've had to run into the staff room and just think of something totally different for the students to do, or go and talk to another colleague and ask them, look, I'm having this problem with this class, would you suggest an activity? And some of the more seasoned teachers will just be able to pick something off from the top of their head, or direct you towards a book or a resource, and you can employ that task in the class straight away. And the final one I'm going to give you is target language. So the target language is the language or linguistic structures that are the focus of instruction in a particular lesson or activity. Now, during the CELTA course, when you're doing your lesson plans, you're expected to highlight or outline the target language, and your target language is the aim of your lesson, as well as the context and all the other things. What you're trying to end up with by the end of the lesson is that the students have left with, a load of words, expressions, idioms, whatever, by the end of the lesson. And when you have those target language very specified, it makes the task of planning the lesson all that more easier. So these were just some of the CELTA terminologies you might come across. There's loads more, but I think these are some of the main ones that I was introduced to, and the ones that I've subsequently taken to heart with me as a teacher and never really forgotten. Hopefully I haven't forgotten them. Maybe I've given you the wrong definitions. No, I haven't. This has all been researched. But you will get, hopefully, if you go on a good, very well organised CELTA course, you will get resources and materials, and hopefully one of them will be a list of terminology that you will be confronted with during the duration of your course. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I hope it wasn't too much. If you liked this, then please consider subscribing to the channel. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment and I will try my best to respond. And good luck if you've just started your CELTA course. Thank you for listening.